Hi, can you hear me, or am I close enough to this thing? Thanks, Kieran. That was actually, I've been to a lot of these briefings over and over and over, and I really appreciate you really put it together in a nice, concise way. It could be that I've been to so many of them that it starts to make sense after a while, but one of the things, so I'm Dan Whelan, I'm Congressman DeFazio's district director. If any of you have heard Congressman, the Congressman at a town hall or others know that he gets pretty thick into the details himself. He's more of a policy expert on this far more than I am, so I'm going to do my best to just convey some of the things he said about it and where he's at. This past year, the Transportation and Infrastructure hearing just recently in November held a hearing on this specific issue. This has been a passion of the Congressman's since he discovered it. About 2 years ago, the mayor of Springfield brought it to his attention, specifically around 2014, when the first draft of the reasonable and prudent alternatives came about. Unfortunately, because there was little consultation done between NIMS and the state of Oregon and the agencies here regarding the RPAs. These actions requiring FEMA, not state and local governments, to prohibit development in the floodplain in order to protect endangered species and critical habitat. The RPA essentially changes the purpose of the NFIP from reducing property damage to protecting endangered species and critical habitats. So basically, the Congressman was not pleased that the direction of the agency went from being one that provides assistance to one to being a regulatory agency. And if I start mumbling, it's only because I had a crown done today. Leftover Novocaine in there. And also these words also are enough to, some of the phrases are enough to make you stumble. I just want to highlight, I brought 15 copies. I don't think that's going to be enough. The Congressman's most recent op-ed about this issue that he had published in the Coos Bay World, I sent that to Jerry in an email. So I've got a copy of that. I've got a copy of an op-ed that he wrote over the summer about this issue in the Register Guard, as well as a link to all the information that was available during the Transportation and Infrastructure hearing he had this last fall, detailing, he had 15 or so letters back and forth between himself and NIMS. He led the delegation and worked with the governor in letting the agency know that he was not pleased with the overreach he feels that NIMS is doing in terms of forcing FEMA to become that regulatory authority. So this is something that he's been very passionate about, and all that information can be found in a link online. One of the things that I could just highlight really from his own words in his op-ed, and you can read it, it's probably written better than ever I can say it more concisely. So there are 271 communities in Oregon that are in a floodplain and participate in the flood insurance program. Of these communities, 251 will be impacted by the new guidelines. Coos Bay, Reedsport, and virtually every city on the coast is a floodplain community. In April 2017, these floodplain communities will receive new federal guidelines that will limit local development or redevelopment in the floodplain areas. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, which administers the National Flood Insurance Program, will redraw and reissue expanded floodplain maps, meaning more homes and businesses will be subject to the new federal guidelines. This mapping process will likely take several years. The 251 Oregon communities, however, will need to adopt city development ordinances and new flood maps based on the new guidelines no later than September 2019. While this process is being developed, FEMA has already instructed all communities participating in the NFIP to voluntarily impose a temporary moratorium on all floodplain development, or voluntarily implement interim measures. Novocaine. FEMA has yet to provide guidance to communities on what those specific requirements entail. The one-size-fits-all land use strategy handed down by NIMS will be the same whether you are a family who wants to expand your house in Central Oregon, a company that wants to redevelop property in downtown Portland, or a small business that wants to build the struggling part, be part of the struggling part of Coos Bay trying to redevelop. These new federal rules will essentially freeze Oregon development in time, stalling economic growth and job creation throughout the state. That is unacceptable. For 2.5 years, I have worked with Oregon communities, local stakeholders, and federal partners to strike a balance between protecting threatened and endangered species and allowing reasonable and residential and economic development. Our voices have fallen on deaf ears of federal bureaucrats at NIMS. We cannot allow our community, our state, our economic health to be held captive by this extraordinary example of bureaucratic overreach. We desperately need a new approach before these federal changes have severe and irreversible economic impacts. That's why I convened a meeting this last week between federal and state officials, this is back in the fall, and representatives from local government, ports, and tribes. We had a productive dialogue and raised our concerns with FEMA. I will continue to hold the agency's feet to the fire and ensure this process works better for Oregon. So as you can tell, he's passionate about this issue, and I just want to make it clear that the congressman still finds it necessary in special areas to make sure we protect areas of the floodplain and protect areas that need to be held different. It's just this blanket one-size-fits-all policy has got him riled because of the impact it could have everywhere. And the uncertainty in the timing is something that is also posing a problem. Here, reference that in the RPAs, initially they said by next year, or 2 years from the issuance of the RPAs, every one of those 251 communities were going to have to adopt ordinances to regulate development or redevelopment in the floodplain. So they told FEMA to tell the communities that you have 2 years to do it, but then said, well, we're going to take one of those years to write up guidelines in order for those communities to move forward on implementing them or working on them or writing them, or Lane County has to come up with them and then run them by the public process. So we have 1 year to do that. That's not an easy task, and especially for 251 communities. When Chris Shirley came to DC and testified, and when she spoke at other various public events, basically said, you know, the average the DLCD can process at a state level of some of those ordinance changes is like maybe 20 to 30 a year. And so all of a sudden there's supposed to be 250. So Keir put it nicely in outlining that there are a lot of flexibility is going to have to happen because it's just not going to be able to be feasibly done. DLCD doesn't have the amount of employees to be able to help process all those, nor does that give communities enough time to have the input from their stakeholders and their communities. So this is something that's frustrating my boss a lot. It's not, you know, the process and the timing, and he feels that it's been an overreach by the agency, ignoring Oregon's existing land use planning policy. So he has a real problem with having the agency, the FEMA, now having to become a land use planning agency regulator. So he continues to keep fighting on this. He tried to get some language into a bill to try to address this. The bill ultimately didn't go through the Senate, but you know, he will continue to fight to protect sensitive areas, but at the same time, he wants to make sure that you know, any type of flood insurance policy is not something that restricts development. In the last example, sensible, smart redevelopment in areas that need it. A good example would be when he was down in Coos Bay, the offices of the Coos Bay World in downtown Coos Bay were in that floodplain. So his problem is that some of these RPAs don't distinguish between downtown Coos Bay and somewhere high up here on the McKenzie River. I mean, basically the same regulations apply to that, and to prevent, or I don't know how you would mitigate a redevelopment of a brownfield in downtown Coos Bay in order to meet the threshold. So those are the things that are causing him to really fight this thing. So I'll be around if anybody's got any questions, or the policy people on the congressman's staff who know this far better than me are available in DC, but I'll have a lot of this material online. It's on his website. If you